Hi, this is Rick Hofer. I want to welcome you to this module where we talk about persuasion. Can I get you to agree to that? Well, I hope I can. I think you're going to learn a lot if you go through the material. We have four main variables in any persuasion effort. First, there's the context, then there's the message, there's the sender, and there's the receiver. We're going to talk about each one of those four variables in some detail. After we go through all that material, there'll be some exercises at the end so you can test your persuasive abilities and see how much you've learned. I look forward to having you watch this, and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome to Persuasion in Advocacy Practice. Persuasion is getting people to do something because they want to, not because they must. You ever go to a concert and the singer says, "All right, everyone clap along with me." Well, no one's forcing the people to clap along. That's persuasion. So that's what you're trying to do in advocacy. So that's the very best thing you can do in advocacy, is to persuade people to do something because they want to. They've adopted your position. They see that it's the right thing to do. In every persuasion attempt, there are four variables that are important. First is the context. Second is the message. Third is the sender. And finally, you have the receiver. We'll cover each one of these four important variables one at a time. The context. One of the most important things about the context is how the issue is framed. Framing means to set forward some perspective or some way of viewing the situation. Frames have within them an implied solution, so that whoever's frame is adopted as the operating one generally is going to be more successful in achieving what they want to achieve in terms of their advocacy. Let me give you a quick example. Is the problem of poverty because people are lazy? Or is the problem of poverty because there are structural inequalities that force some people into a secondary economy where their wages are low, their housing is bad, and their schooling is inadequate? Which of those two frames is going to win out? Depending on which frame is more adopted, then you have a solution already in mind. If people are lazy, and that's why they're poor, then there's really very little you can do except try to spur them on with poverty. On the other hand, if the issue is really one of structural inequalities, then there's not much to do except change the entire system. So you can see that how things are framed are really important. We're going to go over a number of frames that you might try to adopt in order to either enhance your position or to cut down someone else's. The first one is that whatever the proposal is from the other side, it's not fair. It's an unfair situation, and therefore we should reject it. A second frame that's commonly used is, well, that solution just won't work. A variation of that is, we've tried that before and it doesn't work. It will hurt constituents. This is a good one to use when you're dealing with elected officials. They don't want to hurt their constituents, and if you can get them to adopt this idea that the new policy is going to hurt the people that they represent, then it's very likely that they'll vote against it. Another frame that you might try adopting is, it can be done in other ways. That is, the goal is fine, but the way that they're choosing to do it is really not the best way. We can apply these to issues of poverty and inequality. For example, when people proposed a universal healthcare system, the opponents of that said, no, that won't work. And even when people who were for universal health said, it works in other countries. The opponent said, no, it doesn't really work there. It's not as good as it looks, and it will hurt our constituents. They won't be able to choose the doctors that they want. So you see, you can switch from one frame to another, especially when they're all in the same direction. Again, talking about universal health care, people might say, well, it's good that we have health care for people, but it can be done through private insurance companies. We don't need to have the government be a single-payer system. These frames are all used in ways to block the ideas of others. Another common frame for any policy proposal is, it costs too much. If a proposal is framed as costing too much, that's an automatic no vote on the hands of many, many elected officials. Another frame that's used when you're trying to get the adoption of a new proposal as opposed to blocking a proposal is, if it saves the life of one child, it's all worth it. This is a frame that is unabashedly emotional, and it ties into our belief that there are some things that are more important than money. Someone says, well, it costs too much, and the other person says, well, if it saves the life of one child, it's worth it. So you can see that there are competing frameworks here. It will help constituents. That's the opposing frame of it will hurt constituents. If you can get the elected officials to say, yes, I think it will help my constituents, they are more likely to vote for it. The benefits outweigh the costs. That's one that's used frequently when you want to start a new program and you say, especially in the long term, it's going to be beneficial. What would happen if we had better schools in all neighborhoods, especially those in low-income areas? Well, it would be expensive right now, but the benefits will outweigh the costs in the long run. These frames are all very important. Each and every one of them are used constantly when talking about policy proposals. Now, obviously, there's more to the context than just framing, but framing is such a vital part of it and something that we can all do on an individual basis in our discussions that I chose to focus just on that. The second main variable is the message. What are you trying to communicate? There are 5 general principles of persuasive messages that we'll discuss in this section. The first is intent of your message. The second is the organization of your message. The third is something called citedness. We go on to rhetorical questions, and we close off with fear appeals. So what do we mean by intent? Well, the most important thing with persuasion and intent is that the research shows you shouldn't tell people that you're trying to persuade them. That just gets their defenses up. However, there are 2 exceptions. The first exception is when you only want to ask for small changes. So for example, you might say, I really like this proposal. I like this idea, but there's just a couple of really small things I'd like to ask. I think if we change those small things, just a couple of little things, then we'll have a really great proposal. The other exception is when your target already expects you to be attempting persuasion. If you go into the office of a legislator or a city council member, then it's pretty likely that they know you're there to persuade them about something. If you go in and talk with your boss about getting a pay raise, they already know that that's what you're in there for. It's going to be very hard to not tell them what your intent is. So you may as well just be honest. So with intent, don't tell people you're trying to persuade them. That puts them on their guard. But there are these 2 exceptions. Now, it's good to be organized. Really, that's all there is to say about that in terms of the message. Have an organized message that people can follow along and can find the main points that you're talking about quickly and easily. Now, citedness is another issue. Sometimes we wonder whether we should give the other side of the story, the other position, when we're making an advocacy pitch. The research is really clear on this. When you're giving your pitch, you need to do 2 things. You need to challenge the other position, and you need to defend your position. It's important that you do both. If you just talk about your position, onlookers or listeners may think that you're not really giving them the full story. So you have to give the other position as well as your own. But you can't give it in a neutral way, and you can't give it without challenging it. The use of rhetorical questions is very effective, isn't it? The thing that's cool about rhetorical questions is that they're really disguised statements. They stake out a position without appearing to, and if somebody challenges you, you can back away and just say, well, it's just asking a question. Some politicians and some individuals are very clever with this. And the thing is that these kind of statements, these disguised statements, kind of trick your brain into accepting them because they're not really stated as a statement. They're something that's kind of sneakily gotten into your mind, and you don't even necessarily recognize that you're being persuaded this way. Fear appeals. Now we know, according to research, that fear is much stronger than positive emotions. If you want to get people to act, you scare them. And it's not just that you make them afraid, you also offer them a solution to the fear. If you just make people afraid, then they freeze and they won't do anything. So what you have to do is make them feel afraid of the situation or the future repercussions of a situation, but you offer them a solution that is going to help them feel calm again. And if you do this successfully, people will follow your lead. Information. There's really two kinds of information. The first is substantive information, and these are the facts upon which you base your arguments. This is the kind of stuff that you learn how to find in a research class. The other kind of information is called contextual information. This relates to how the situation appears to interested or potentially interested others. This is kind of like gossip. Gossip is information that's about the context. It's oftentimes also, more powerful than substantive information. If you think about this in terms of an organization, you might have people say, well, yeah, the facts are this, but so-and-so is not going to let that happen. And then people stop advocating for it. Or sometimes you can use it the other way around. The boss really wants this, so it doesn't matter what the facts are. Advocates need to know both kinds of information. The substantive information for those people who need facts and figures, and the contextual information so that the decision makers can know kind of what they're stepping into. Now we have to know how we're going to present the information. Once the information is gathered, there's at least two different ways to present it. And there are two elements to this decision. The first is the format. Are you going to be talking one-on-one? Are you going to be delivering this through written materials? Is it going to be on a website? The format is simply the method of displaying it or of communicating the data. The other element is the manner. And we'll talk more about the manner of presenting right now. Accuracy. Accuracy. You've got to be accurate. I know that that's not always true in the political sphere, that sometimes people get away with just bald-faced lying. But for advocates, you really should be accurate as much as you can. This is where your research skills come in, and you should be able to back up your facts. Time. Brief is better. If you can get something across in 1 minute, that's better than 5 minutes, as long as it's equally effective. Most decision makers won't give you a lot of time, so you need to understand what your point is and how you're going to get it across quickly. The message style. The negative or positive. We sometimes like to say that positive is better because that's kind of the way social workers are. Unfortunately, human beings are wired to pay more attention to fear and to a negative style message than a positive one. So just keep that in mind as you're laying out your plan and your advocacy. Content. The basic message of any persuasion attempt is to describe a problem and provide a solution. That sounds pretty basic, but it is. That's just what it is. You describe a problem, you provide a solution, and then you actually have a call to action. So that's what we're trying to get away from. This is how we can eliminate it. Now let's go do it. If you can use that framework, you can be very persuasive. Clarity. Obviously, clear is better. You'd be surprised at how often presentations are not clear, but obviously clearer is better. So that was the message, all the information about the message. The most important element for the sender is credibility. How are you perceived? And credibility has three aspects. The first is expertise, the second is trustworthiness, and the third is likability. Expertise is having the facts. Are you an expert? Do you know the details of all the positions? Do you know which facts support which part and which proposals? That's expertise. Trustworthiness is different. Trustworthiness is, do people believe you? Okay, you can be an expert and not be seen as trustworthy. Maybe people say, yeah, you're an expert, but you're also on the payroll of so-and-so who really doesn't want this proposal. So it's not clear that you would really tell us the truth. So those two things are separate, expertise and trustworthiness. Obviously, if you're an expert who is seen as being trustworthy, then you're going to have a lot of credibility. You can be an expert without being trusted. You can be trusted without having expertise. And the third element here is likability. We all know those people who are very likable, who are charismatic, who just have people follow them and believe everything they say. So being likable can get you quite a ways, even if you're not an expert. But of course, likability and trustworthiness are two interrelated concepts. So as a sender, you want to work on establishing your expertise, you want to have a record of trustworthiness, and you want to try to be likable. These three aspects will increase your credibility and increase your effectiveness as an advocate. Now we come to the receiver. This is the person who is the target of all of your advocacy activity and all of your persuasive effort. What do we know about the receiver? Receivers think about things differently, perhaps, than you and I do. Some receivers are very heuristic. They don't really care for the deep facts. They just want to know the general idea. Other ones are very tied to actual facts and figures, and they want to know that you really know your stuff. They don't trust you if you're not an expert. So those kind of receivers need to have different kinds of messages and be approached differently by the senders. Here's the bottom line. Receivers convince themselves. We may think as advocates that we're convincing them, but in fact what we're doing is providing reasons and rationales that the person says, okay, I think I will decide to go that direction. We as advocates have very little control over anything about the receivers. And this is true whether you're dealing with the President of the United States or your spouse or your children. People convince themselves, and you're just going along trying to help them reach the conclusion that you would like them to reach. So let's turn to some exercises in persuasion. These are kind of fun, so I hope you take this in a lighthearted yet serious way. Name that frame. Part 1. Read the following sentences. Which persuasion frame or technique is being used in each one? Oh, come on, it'll be fun. What kind of persuasion effort is that? Here's the next one. We went to the movie you wanted to see last time, so I think it's my turn to choose. If you can't pay me more, I'll have no choice but to find another job. Now, I've done research on this, and the proper course of action is to do what I'm suggesting. Think of each one of these statements and what frame or technique is being used. All right, part 2 of Name That Frame. You've done a great job on this report, and I agree with all your recommendations except the third one. It's just a small thing I'm asking for, but could we delete that one? Don't you see? If we don't act on this quickly, the best candidates will already be hired by someone else. Haven't you noticed other nonprofit leaders in town are all attending the Social Venture Partnership Council's meetings? Wouldn't it be a good idea for you to go too? Alright, so that's kind of a fun little game. You can come up with your own examples. Just listen to any kind of policy debate and you'll see that there are competing frames. See if you can identify the techniques that they're using. The second persuasion exercise is to analyze your own persuasion efforts. Think of a recent time when you attempted to persuade someone about a work-related matter. Describe your effort to yourself or to someone else. Analyze what you did, and then say whether it was successful or not. If it wasn't successful, could you apply the information from this material to make your argument stronger? Is there something you've learned by listening to this video that you could now go back and say, yeah, I could have done that, or maybe next time I'll try to do that particular technique? If you were successful, did you use any of the ideas that are in this material, whether you knew it or not? Sometimes we've learned different techniques along the way during our life, and we just use them naturally. All right, I hope you found this material useful and fun, and I want you to go out and apply it. You can apply persuasion efforts in any locale, in any situation. Try it. The more you try it, the stronger you'll be. Well, now that you've completed those exercises, you realize that you've learned an awful lot of material. That's a lot of persuasiveness that you're now able to carry on. Be careful. Use it only for good. Now, the last module in this advocacy series is about negotiation. We've gone through the three main types then. Once you get through that, education, persuasion, and negotiation. Persuasion is where you get what you want because the other person adopts your viewpoint. In negotiation, you're going to find that you have to give up some of what you wanted in order to get the rest of what you wanted. So I hope you enjoy that, and when we get to the end of the negotiation, we'll be at the end of the series. There's still a lot left to learn, so don't give up now.